Arthur's Cook Publishers present The Book of Gabriel, The Revelation Stone by Chris Cook and Caroline Arthurs Cook. Read by Tanj Finnegan, with music by Matt Brimmelkuhn.
Chapter 7. Detective Inspector Tariq Ahmed. Mrs. O'Brien, the girls, and a few other guests were still hiding in the woods as they watched the fire consuming what was left of the roof. "Stay down, girls," shouted Mrs. O'Brien, who was still able to feel the heat from the flames despite being a safe distance away. "I'm certain the police will be here soon." She was too far away to see what had transpired between the rest of the clerics and the Slemevoids. A couple of the female guests were trying to offer comfort to the scared girls, many of whom were in various states of shock, and some were overwhelmed by fear. Alex was particularly traumatized by the whole affair and unable to move from where she was hiding behind a tree. Amelia rushed over to Alice to console the distraught girl, who was weeping uncontrollably. The fact that Alice was now trembling uncontrollably was not only caused by her being wet from the sprinklers, but before she left the rubber duck. What a difference a few hours can make, Amelia thought. While Alice cried, Amelia recalled the bizarre events of the previous 10 or so hours. "I can hardly believe I've seen an angel, received a message from the Creator himself, had an awesome out-of-body experience, discovered that I'm the target of a group of evil demons, got a massive magic diamond in my pocket, and now I'm friends again with Alice? Oh, and I've just escaped being killed." Amelia marvelled as she wondered what else the future would hold for her. During a lull in Alice's sobs, Amelia felt she would try to be cheerful. "Alice, I must say I've never seen you run so fast." Alice managed to smile a little through her tears. Sophie, Erin, and some of the others came over to them. By now they were shivering, so they all huddled together. "I think it's all over now," said Mrs. O'Brien. "There you go, we're all okay, you see, we're all here." Amelia found a clean tissue in her other jacket pocket and gave it to Alice, encouraging her to wipe her eyes and blow her nose. "I can't believe we all got out safely," Alice sniffed, looking around her at all her friends. Wendy was still crying heavily. "Amelia, we could have been killed, but you saved our lives." "It's true, Amelia, you did save our lives," the other girls agreed. Feeling more than a little awkward at hearing this, Amelia shrugged her shoulders. "Seriously, I'm the last person you should be thanking. I was amazed at how fast all the staff got everyone out, though. Emmett, Nancy, and those guys are the heroes." The last thing Amelia wanted was to be hailed as anything great, and although she certainly did not feel like a hero, she was fated to become one of the most notable heroines on earth. Alice looked at Amelia. "How did you even know those crazy people were going to be here, though?" she asked, remembering that Amelia had woken her. There was nobody outside the bed and breakfast at that point. The girls looked at Amelia. It was the first time any of them had stopped to think about who had raised the alarm. Not quite knowing what to say, Amelia stammered, well, you see, but before she could offer any explanation, she saw Nancy and Claude walking towards them. "You can all come out now," shouted Claude. Trying to sound jovial, added, "The bad guys have all taken off." Relieved at the chance to avoid answering the question, Amelia quickly walked off towards Nancy, Claude, and the still-burning building. "Let's go, girls," said Mrs. O'Brien, who shepherded the rest of the girls from behind as they slowly emerged from the safety of the woods. There were at least 12 paramedics, 8 police officers, and together with the 3 fire crews who were endeavouring to get the flames under control, the presence of so many emergency service personnel brought a needed sense of safety to Amelia and her companions. Paramedics rushed over with foil blankets and began to treat the shocked teenage girls. Soon afterwards, police officers started to take statements from Mrs. O'Brien, her young charges, and the other guests about what they had witnessed. At length, Amelia heard a man talking to Lionel, Emmett, Clark, and Warren, who were all standing around in a circle. Their faces were expressionless, as they all stood quietly looking at their interrogator, who had dark skin and looked to be in his mid-50s. He was well-shaved and wore a brown leather jacket over what Amelia recognized as a white Middle Eastern thobe and cap. "So let me get this straight. You were expecting me to believe that not one of you has any idea what happened here. or why this place of all places looks as though it was the target of an assassination attempt? As we said, Inspector, we woke up when the bikes arrived, saw the bikers had guns and a couple of fuel cans, and were heading towards the B&B. Got our guests out as soon as we could, Warren explained in his very matter-of-fact manner. And you didn't recognize any of them? Or know that they might have targeted you or the bed and breakfast? Asked Detective Inspector Tariq Ahmed as he looked suspiciously at the group. He decided on a different line of approach. The police were called to this same location yesterday night. Might the two incidents be connected? A matter of sheer coincidence, Inspector. Last night was a false alarm, Lionel bluffed. Nancy joined the group. She had a foil blanket wrapped around her shoulders and her arms were tightly folded. Forgive me for interrupting, but we really have no idea. What I do know is that the guests and my staff have all had a traumatic experience throughout the entire night and we are cold and tired. She looked him straight in the eyes as she continued to speak. Some of the guests wish to know if they can remove their cars from the rear car park so they can leave. As I hope you can imagine, it's been a long night for all of us, Inspector. Is there any way we continue these questions at a better time? Inspector Ahmed considered Nancy and held her gaze. Satisfied she was being sincere, he put his pen in his notebook back inside his jacket. That will be all for now. I have all your contact details and I will be in touch should I have any further questions, he added before turning around and walking off towards a uniformed police officer. As soon as he was beyond earshot, Warren was the first to speak. I've heard of this guy before. He's investigated other incidents involving the Slemevoids, but just hasn't joined all the dots yet. Yeah, you're right. I thought he looked familiar, Lionel agreed. Well, it looks like he's buying our story for the time being at least, but in the meantime, we've got to get out of here, then redeploy. Claude's gone to get the coach, Nancy said. Emmett, if you follow in your car with a couple of our guests, Lionel, you be the lead. The sooner we get Amelia back to London, the better, she added. Excuse me, officer, Inspector Ahmed called out, unsure of who he was addressing. I'm P.C. Hancock, Governor. How can I help you? Replied P.C. Hancock respectfully. What school did the teacher say they were from? P.C. Hancock took out his little red pocketbook and flipped through the pages of the notes he had just jotted down. I have it here. It says Archbishop John Maxwell, Inspector Ahmed said, finishing P.C. Hancock's sentence. That's the one, P.C. Hancock confirmed before closing his book again. Is there anything else I can help you with, Gov? No, that will be all, thanks, replied Inspector Ahmed, turning away from the officer, but then he had a thought. In fact, there is just one more thing you might be able to help with. Who was it that attended the missing persons call to this location last night? Actually, Gov, that was the first call I attended at the start of my shift, and I was in attendance with Barnes, Jones, Phillips, and a couple of others. Would you like to know the name of the girl who went missing? P.C. Hancock asked, again opening his pocketbook and searching the notes he had made earlier that evening. Yes, that would be most helpful. P.C. Hancock looked over to the group of girls standing with an ambulance crew. Amelia was amongst them. That's the girl there, with the denim jacket and white Converse, he said, motioning with his head towards the girls. Her name is Newman, Amelia Newman from Hampton Wick in London. Literally just turned 15 yesterday. Ah, is that so? Happy birthday to you, Amelia Newman, Inspector Ahmed muttered to himself. She was no stranger to him. Is there anything else I can help you with, Gov? Thank you, Hancock. You've been extremely helpful, Inspector Ahmed replied, walking away from the officer, his eyes never leaving Amelia, who was oblivious to the fact that she was being watched. I've just come off the phone to the headmaster and he agrees that we must curtail this trip for the rest of the year, said Mrs. O'Brennan, addressing the girls. We obviously can't stay here, and it's best that we get you back to your families. This was met with groans from several of the girls. Mr. Galloway is just glad that no one was seriously hurt. He wants each of you to call your parents, tell them you're okay, but the trip has been cancelled, so you're coming home. In terms of your belongings, I will call the owners of the B&B to find out what could be salvaged and return your things. And we'll be in touch with your parents about insurance claims for anything lost or damaged by the fire. Mrs. O'Brennan continued. And those of you who don't have a mobile phone can borrow mine. The minibus is now a berthed-out wreck, so we're going to have to take the train back to London. Excuse me, Radhika, I overheard you saying that you're getting the train to London, said Nancy. It's still only 4:36 a.m. and the first train doesn't leave for London until after 5:30 a.m. Besides, how would you all get to the station? Claude and I are also travelling to London. We're travelling back in the hotel's coach that's normally reserved for excursions around the lake. Only a few of our staff will be joining us, so there'll be more than enough space. He's gone to get it and he'll be back in a few minutes. We feel so terrible about the experience you've had, and we must insist that you allow us to take you back to London. Mrs. O'Brennan and Nancy exchanged the most subtle of expressions, both aware that Amelia's safety was paramount. Needing very little persuasion, Rodica smiled before replying. Of course, thank you so much. That would be wonderful. The kids are all so exhausted, and after the craziness of the last couple of hours, I'm sure there won't be any trouble. Please don't mention it. It's the very least we can do. And here it is now. A white luxury coach pulled up on the road. Not a moment too soon, said Nancy, as the door opened, revealing Claude in the driver's seat. The girls rushed over to the coach and piled in one by one. Amelia was one of the first to get a seat near the front. Breathing a deep sigh, glad to be sitting down, she relaxed her head back on the seat rest, put her hand in a pocket of her jacket and found her revelation stone. Revealed to feel it was there, she closed her eyes and settled back. As the coach drove away, and her thoughts turned to Mary, she felt someone sit down in the seat next to her. She opened her eyes again to see Alice was brightly smiling at her. I hope I didn't disturb you. Don't be silly, of course not. It's nice of you to sit with me. Oh, Amelia, I've been so horrible to you, Alice said with tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know how you could ever forgive me. Don't worry about it, said Amelia with her trademark shoulder shrug. What's to forgive? She was only too relieved at the hope she would be able to move on from the last few years of torment. She wanted to offer Alice some cake when she discovered she no longer had it. Oh no, I left my cake container on the ambulance step. I'm sorry. I was wondering what you had in there. Honestly, Amelia, only you would think of rescuing a load of cake from a burning building. Weirdo. She gave Amelia a wink, then grinned. Amelia smiled back and sighed. It was my birthday yesterday. My mum made it for me and insisted I shared it with you guys. Wow, that was some birthday. I guess you could say that, Amelia grinned. Seriously, Amelia, I don't know how you did it, but thanks for saving all of our lives last night, added Alice. I'll never forget what you've done, and for the record, I didn't mean what I said about you being square or any of the other horrible names I've called you over the years. Except maybe weirdo? Amelia joked. Honestly, you are probably the coolest person I know, so if it makes you a weirdo, then so be it. Amelia couldn't help but be flattered by Alice's confession. Even though I don't know any of the Backstreet Boys songs? Well, that was perfect. The two girls looked at each other and burst into a fit of giggles. Does anybody else need to use my phone? Mrs. O'Brennan asked, walking down the aisle. Ooh, can I please, miss? Mrs. O'Brennan handed Amelia the phone. Sorry for the disturbed sleep, Mum, Amelia thought while she waited for Mary to answer. It rang 3 times before she heard Mary's sleepy voice, a sound which was more comforting and reassuring to her than anything else. Hello, Mum, it's me, she said quietly, almost whispering. Amelia, is everything okay? Asked Mary, now fully alert, the tone of weariness being entirely replaced with one of worry. She looked at her bedside clock. It had just gone 5:18 a.m. Yes, no need to worry, Amelia answered cheerfully, trying not to cause any undue alarm. We were all evacuated from the bed and breakfast we were in, so Mr. Galloway decided to cut short the trip this year. Oh dear, what happened? There was a fire scare, that's all. Anyway, we're on a coach heading back to London now with some of the staff from the bed and breakfast. I'll call work and ask them to take some time off today. No, Mum, there's no need. I don't want you getting into trouble for taking time off. Besides, I can relax at home for a few hours until you get back from work. Are you sure? Mary sounded less than sure. Of course I'm sure. The last thing I want to do is cause you any bother. Oh, my darling, I'm sorry your trip was spoiled. I'll tell you what. How'd you like to meet me in Kingston at one of the lovely restaurants by the river for dinner after I finish work this evening? Maybe your favourite, A.C. Bohm's? At around 8:10? A.C. Bohm's sounds splendid, replied Amelia emphatically. I love you, Mum. I love you too, darling. See you later. Will do. Please take care." Amelia handed the phone back to Mrs. O'Brennan, feeling so much better after having spoken to her mother. Ever since her father had died, Amelia, Teresa, and Melody always endeavoured to protect their mother from experiencing any degree of pain or suffering. They considered she had had enough to bear, so did all they could to protect her from any news that might make her worry. Amelia knew she could shoulder the full details of what had really happened without needing to tell her mother. With that thought in mind, she finally closed her eyes and dozed off to sleep. Protected in the rear by Emmett and the 3 undercover guests, and Lionel at the front with another 3 guests, the coach's convoy made its way down the narrow countryside roads and through the rolling hills, heading out of the Lake District. As the sun rose at 5:40 a.m. that morning, the sweet bird song of the dawn chorus seemed out of place against the charred ruins of the rubber duck. The ambulance crews had left the site, but the chief fire officer and a few of his colleagues were still there, as were several police officers. Inspector Ahmed returned to his car, folded his prayer mat and placed it on the front passenger seat. His family had arrived in the UK from Yemen when he was only a young boy, and he remained a devout Muslim. He sat watching the fire chief and pondered the night's events, bothered by how the last few hours had gone. At age 57, Inspector Ahmed desperately wanted to solve what he called Operation Al-Jinn, the biggest and most challenging cold case of his career. You could say Inspector Ahmed was no less infatuated with this particular unsolved case than Captain Ahab was with Moby Dick, the elusive whale. He thought about it constantly, the first thing at the crack of dawn and the last thing at night. With 27 years of service in the police, Inspector Ahmed was well experienced and highly accredited for solving many of the most difficult cases across the United Kingdom. For the last 20 years, he had led a small team investigating strange happenings and unsolved cases. He had 3 years left in which to solve Al-Jinn before he retired, and he knew he was up against time. At length, Inspector Ahmed reached into his glove compartment and retrieved some plastic shoe protectors, which he immediately put on and popped a couple of evidence bags and a pair of blue latex gloves in his pocket. He then stepped out of his vehicle and headed towards the west end of the building, lifted the cordon tape and slowly walked around the rubble. Looking intently for something, not knowing exactly what, but he knew he would find it. "Where are you?" Inspector Ahmed thought. As he continued a closer inspection of the rubble, he noticed a small remnant of scorched wire poking out from a fallen piece of masonry. Removing a latex glove from a pocket and an evidence bag from another, he stooped down and pushed some debris aside with his pen to take a closer look. He gently picked it up and saw the tiniest fragment of red rubber surrounding the wires. At once he recognized it as coming from an improvised explosive device and smiled. "There you are," he said out loud and dropped it into the evidence bag. "Now all I have to do is find out what your connection is to the birthday girl." It was 6:30 a.m. when Nancy stood at the front of the coach, holding a large round Perspex container. She took hold of the microphone, which gave a piercing shriek of feedback, before she was able to speak. "Hello, may I have your attention, please?" Several people opened their eyes, others stretched out their arms. "I'm sorry to disturb you all, but an ambulance crew member gave me this earlier, and I understand it was someone's birthday yesterday?" she said, looking towards Amelia, who still had her eyes closed. Alice nudged Amelia awake. "Amelia, look, Nancy's got it. She's got your cake." "There you go, Amelia. Happy belated birthday." Nancy handed the container back to Amelia, whose cheeks blushed as she briefly stood up and looked behind her seat to everyone singing "Happy Birthday" to her. There was enough cake for those who wanted to take a piece, and Amelia was thrilled that her dear mother's cake was being enjoyed. "Is everything okay back there?" Nancy said over the microphone. "We plan to stop off at a service station for a toilet break and maybe some breakfast. Would everyone be okay with that?" With no objections, Lionel, who had heard the instruction from over his radio, took the next exit and followed the road to the services, followed by the coach and Emmett behind. As she got off the coach and headed towards the Wimpy restaurant, Amelia noticed something about Lionel and Emmett and the guests they had driven with. None of them spoke to each other, and they appeared uneasy and on edge. Even those who had appeared to be travelling together from the coach were looking around the restaurant in every direction, as if they expected trouble at any moment. "So what are you having?" asked Nancy, interrupting Amelia's observations. She joined Amelia in the queue. Amelia looked up at the menu board. She had been so focused on the strange behaviour of the others that she had not thought to look at what to eat. "I'm not sure. I haven't decided yet. What are you having?" "I'm going for the egg sandwich," said Nancy, dropping a handful of change on the floor. "Oh, I'm so clumsy." "Oh, here, let me help you," Amelia offered, crouching down. But as Nancy bent forward to pick up the change, she flicked her hair behind her neck, and Amelia noticed a strange little tattoo at the back of Nancy's right ear. It was a rather unique heraldic design of an octopus, which was holding 7 swords and a shield in its tentacles. Amelia did a double take as she recalled seeing the same unusual tattoo on the inside of Claude's wrist the day before when he had placed her lunch on the table. "Cool tattoo," she said, wondering if Claude and Nancy were romantically linked. She handed Nancy the coins she had gathered. "Oh, you like my tattoo?" The speed in which Nancy tucked the lock of her thick dark hair behind her right ear surprised Amelia. "It's no big deal," Nancy explained, trying to sound aloof but feeling far from it. Caught off guard, she was thinking fast and folded her arms almost too defensively, clutching on the change in her balled fist. "Yeah, I saw it on a poster in a tattoo salon and I guess I liked it. Thought it was unique, you know?" "Yeah, it's definitely unique," Amelia replied. Nancy shot a sideways glance at Amelia, who seemed to be keenly studying the breakfast options but who was actually wondering how Nancy and Claude were involved. The high-ranking Slemevoids had long departed the Komodo's hollow beneath Castle Rig, leaving the large and ostentatiously decorated rooms vacant and deathly quiet. Suddenly, the morning hush was broken by a mournful scream, followed by the sound of breaking glass echoing through the palace, the extensive cave system beyond. "I will have my revenge," growled Faust, who was standing in front of a shattered mirror in one of the bathrooms. Although he had restricted vision, what he could see of his reflection he detested. He hated the feel of his disfigured face and his blinded right eye and injured left, and lamented the loss of his once handsome features, at times wishing he had been made blind in both eyes. He obtained the injuries over 8 months earlier, and despite them no longer causing physical pain, Faust felt continued anguish searing at his soul and cursed those who had inflicted his suffering. For nearly 2,000 years, Faust had been in a constant warfare with the Zamatarian clerics. It was they who had maimed him and almost killed him, but luckily for Faust he had escaped with his life, but not unscathed. For though immortal, Faust was susceptible to injuries, including fatal ones, and every scar on his body told its own story of his endless battles with the clerics. "The incompetent imbeciles!" he screamed at his distorted reflection. "If you want something done, you must do it yourself." He turned away from the shattered mirror, grinding his teeth and clenching his fists. "I will finally put an end to those blasted clerics." Regaining his composure, he took a comb from a shelf and combed back his hair using slow, deliberate strokes. He reached for a pair of dark sunglasses from his inner breast pocket and put them on. Feeling a little more satisfied with his appearance, he then turned and walked out of the bathroom. His stride was long and smooth, and his footsteps were near silent. When he approached any of the Komodo dragons, the normally vicious reptiles clumsily ran to get out of his way. Pitiful creatures, he thought, balking at their stench. Outside the door of the underground palace were a group of Faust's bodyguards. Most of them had been at the meeting the day before. They were all dressed as they had previously been in black suits, shirts, and ties, and now they were all wearing dark glasses. "Where will it be, sir?" asked one of the guards as they accompanied Faust to a fleet of brand-new, heavily armoured black Range Rovers. Each of the guards were heavily armed with side pistols and machine guns. They knew his volatile nature and quickly learned to listen well. "M15, London," replied Faust, economizing his words. He stepped into one of the luxury cars with the opened back door. "Very good, sir," replied another bodyguard, as he closed the heavy door and got into the passenger seat at the front. Faust pushed a button for the privacy window to appear between the rear and front of the vehicle. He did not wish to be disturbed. The fleet of 10 cars started their engines and drove down a long tunnel out of the cave entrance, entered a secure compound that was surrounded by 12 feet tall stone walls that were 3 feet thick, and finally exiting through a large security gate made of fortified steel. Driving through the picturesque town of Keswick, then taking the A road towards Windermere, Faust again mused over the meeting he had held with the Slemevoids, and why it had taken them so long to defeat the Zamatarian order. He looked out of the car window at the wrong moment. The view outside made his blood boil as the car drove past the cordoned-off, burned ruins of the rubber duck bed and breakfast, serving to remind him of yet another Slemevoidian failure. Furious, he picked up the car phone and began to dial a series of numbers. "Buongiorno, master," said a deep, husky Italian voice on the other end of the line. "I trust you have done exactly as I commanded," Faust sternly said in fluent Italian. "Precisely as you commanded, master," the man replied, also in Italian. Faust hung up the phone without saying goodbye. At 8 a.m., the convoy pulled into the LDH, Lake District heliport. The sun shone onto his face as Faust stepped out of the car, walked along a narrow red carpet surrounded by security, and ignoring the morning's greetings to the pilot, boarded the passenger compartment of a blue and white luxury helicopter. He looked out over the undulating landscapes during takeoff, thought of the Zamatarian clerics, and mustered a sinister, lopsided smile. "No doubt you were all laughing this morning, but we'll see who'll have the last laugh."